Mike Tomlin says the Steelers will have a quarterback competition between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. What else did he say at owners' meetings? That, more, and Mock Draft Monday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, y'all. So first, we're back here. It's Monday. The Steelers, no major moves, but Mike Tomlin did speak at owners' meetings on Sunday, so we're going to get some reactions to that on today, what is my birthday. I'm turning 35 today, so I'm gonna be enjoying myself tonight a little bit. So if the next episode is a little bit late, excuse me. I'm gonna try to get it done earlier in the day before I start my festivities. But let's get right to what Mike Tomlin said. And he addressed the quarterback situation. It was the first time Mike Tomlin has spoken since the team has traded away Kenny Pickett and brought in both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields to have everything lined up for them. So the question now is, now that we know that there are two of these quarterbacks that are new to the roster, what's going to be the situation? Well, Mike Tomlin did say that Russell Wilson understands, and both quarterbacks understands, that Russell Wilson will start in the pole position of QB1. But he says, quote, rest assured, when it's time to compete, Justin Fields will be given an opportunity to compete and will allow those guys to sort themselves out. But I thought it was appropriate to describe it in a way that to describe it in terms of how we get started. And this makes sense because part of what he talked about with Russell Wilson is he's got leadership. He said, quote, he's just got a leadership in terms of what it takes to be the guy over the course of a 12-month calendar. And we know this is important for the Steelers. Experience is important. Where you've been is important. And you look at the history that Russell Wilson has behind him. Again, 9 Pro Bowls, Super Bowl champion, over a decade in the NFL. There's certainly a lot behind that. Justin Fields, whereas everyone I think agrees that his ceiling, because he's in his mid-20s right now, his ceiling is so much higher than where Russell Wilson is right now, because he's going to be able to grow and get into that. But his floor, Russell Wilson's floor, is probably higher because he has experience. He can come in. And it's like what I said in a few episodes last week. I think a big part of this is also the Steelers recognized they had to reset not just the quarterback skills, but the quarterback leadership. They needed a guy who could galvanize the offense, everyone could get behind, and be a person that everyone's like, hey, that guy knows how to lead an offense in the NFL. You didn't necessarily have that with Kenny Pickett. I think people like Kenny Pickett because he was a good man. He was a hard worker, and everyone's like, hey, we root for Kenny. He's our guy. But Kenny Pickett had 2 years and he still didn't have any breakthrough games. He had some moments that were breakthroughs and some great last minute drives, but Russell Wilson's a different kind of quarterback that allows him to be able to, that allows the Steelers to kind of say, hey, this guy knows how to manage the moment, and not just manage the moment of the game, but also manage throughout the season. And and again, we talked to guys like Cody Rourke of Locked On Broncos. We talked to people that have covered Russell Wilson, and they're saying that, and the Steelers are also saying, Alan Saunders also said this from sources that he had when he was reporting on it, that Russell Wilson is not this problem child that he's been made out to be, which we said might play a factor into whether or not they get Russell Wilson. And apparently that's not an issue. So now they're looking at Russell Wilson as the guy who's going to galvanize the team a little bit. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see how these two mix. I also think it's good that they're giving Justin Fields a chance to compete, because Justin Fields, again, I like Justin Fields. I was just saying all along, they don't need to trade a first, second, or third round pick for it. I thought a 4th rounder this year would have been a great price. Instead, they trade away a 6th rounder next year with the conditional thing of if he plays more than half the snaps this season, then Justin Fields, that turns into a 4th rounder next year. But with Russell Wilson in pole position, unless Justin Fields wins that competition, that's not going to be a 4th rounder. And here's the other thing. If Justin Fields becomes a franchise quarterback for the Steelers, you just paid a 4th round pick a year ahead of time for that. So that's not a problem either. I don't think the Steelers will weigh that too much into the conversation as far as who earns the starting job. But I think it's good that they're allowing this to be a competition. This way, Russell Wilson knows he has to come correct. He can't just come in and just be like, yep, my team, I get to do whatever I want. Steelers country, let's ride, all that. No, he knows there's a guy right behind him who is hungry and wants to prove himself. And at the same time, Justin Fields also knows, hey, I got to prove myself. And there's a veteran who's going to be extremely prepared, who knows about the NFL, that I'm going to have to outperform. And if I don't outperform them, I have to be ready for when my opportunity is going to come. And that, I think, is a healthy relationship in the quarterback room. And so that probably brings to some of you the question. It's like, okay, well, wait a second. If this is going to be a competition with Justin Fields, was there going to be a competition for Kenny Pickett? And I think reasonably, yes, because Kenny Pickett was told there was going to be a competition, and it was assumed when Russell Wilson was brought in that, well, he's probably going to be pole positioned at QB1, but maybe they can compete. Some have speculated that Kenny Pickett wasn't going to be given the chance to compete. I think this kind of shows that was always the plan, was to give him a chance to compete, just like Justin Fields is going to be given a chance to compete. The Steelers want a young quarterback to evolve into their starter and be a good player and be a guy they can depend upon for the next 10 plus years. But they also recognize that, like, right now, they have to get something settled in this offense. And part of it's the new offensive coordinator, too, Arthur Smith, who Mike Tomlin also said, I respect his approach to his ball. His values are very evident. Looking at his tape, they are aligned with the things that we value, controlling the game through our bigs and building from there. We'll get into the bigs part in a little bit. But I think that Arthur Smith knows how to work an offense. Russell Wilson knows how to work an offense. They're two veteran guys in the NFL who can come together and understand and kind of work with the current roster to say, hey, this is the product we want to put out there. This is what we're going to be trying to do to make sure that this offense is not in the bottom of the league again. And again, like, I know some people out there saying, like, okay, well, so what if they're a mediocre offense, what does that do for the Steelers? But this is what I've been talking about for a while. If the Steelers last year were a mediocre offense, this team would have been a serious threat. Why? Because they were the 6th best scoring defense, and they probably would have ranked a lot higher in things like yards and other categories if they weren't on the field so much, because their offense was ranked 28th in scoring and 25th in yards. And you look at those rankings, I said going into last season, if they can get that number up to 16, they're a problem. They can be a difference maker, because now you're talking about an offense that's not averaging scoring 16 or 19 points a game. They're averaging scoring 24, 25 points a game. And they're putting themselves in a position where they're better suited to be able to battle with teams and win more games, not by needing just the defense to be what sets things up for them. And I think that's where the Steelers right now are hoping to get themselves. Like, if you look at offenses right now and where they were last year, they averaged 17.9 points per game. You want to get that up into the 20s. And even if they just get it up to 22 points per game, like a little over a field goal, 22 points per game would have been higher than what the Chiefs averaged last year. That would have put them at ranked 15th in the NFL. If they can get that with the defense that they're able to play with TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Minka Fitzpatrick, Cam Hayward, Joey Porter Jr., now you add Patrick Queen to the mix, Dante Jackson at corner, and maybe some other picks added in the draft, you're talking about a team that can be really well balanced. And that's where they want to get with Russell Wilson. And that's where they probably want to get with Justin Fields. But Russell Wilson be giving pole position shows, hey, we want a guy who's done this before, who's been part of these types of offenses, and can help set the tone for if Justin Fields is next, or if they go and get a whole other person entirely after that. But bottom line, I understand what Mike Tomlin's doing here, what the Steelers are doing here, and it does make sense. And it does make you wonder, why didn't Kenny Pickett want to stick around for that? Because that would have been the opportunity to take it from Russell Wilson as soon at the first sign of trouble, or next year when Russell Wilson's probably not here anymore. So big questions there, but still, I think it's good to see that that you looked at Russell Wilson and you look at Justin Fields, and they are going to have at least a legitimate competition. Russell Wilson being given the favor of the pole position, but either way, they're going to be the guys that we look at. We are going to see an actual competition in training camp. We'll talk about that more as we move along, but we also got to talk about other things that Mike Tomlin said. And one thing that he brought up too was he brought up how the Steelers still have work to do in other departments, especially on the offensive line. And if you heard what I quote that I said there about Arthur Smith's offense, one thing Mike Tomlin said is you want to control the games with your bigs. Well, this year they haven't really added to their bigs yet. So what has to be done there? We'll talk about that more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. That's $200 that you can spend on point spreads, money lines, and you can even pick who you think's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and you can bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. For new customers, get $200 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. And that's on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our discussions here on this Monday episode. We will get to Mock Draft Monday at the end of the show, but we're going to look at some more draft stuff here because Mike Tomlin kind of addressed some things there. Now, another thing that Mike Tomlin talked about is that the Steelers still had, quote-unquote, work to be done at center and wide receiver, two offensive positions. Of course, the Steelers cut Mason Cole, their starting center. Even if they didn't, we go into this offseason saying, hey, that might be the most important position that they have to fix in this offseason, and they haven't done that yet. And then, of course, wide receiver, because they traded away Deontay Johnson all they've done is add Van Jefferson. And Van Jefferson, a fine, kind of Allen Robinson-like replacement, but George Pickens needs a number 2 next to him, and it can't just be Calvin Austin and hoping that he figures things out. Calvin Austin would be great if he does figure things out, but they need someone else by them, someone that's a higher pedigree, and that's where things have to go. Now, Mike Tomlin did also say that there's still options available in free agency, but he believes that wide receiver can be, it needs to be someone who can contribute ASAP as well as a center. And Mike Tomlin also said there's only a few centers in the draft who would be plug and play type of guys and be readily available. And that's where he thinks that there's many wide receivers that can fit that role, but only a few centers, which makes us wonder, are the Steelers committing to the plan of drafting a center high? Now, we have contemplated this for weeks here, months even, on the Locked On Steelers podcast, whether or not it's a center they're going to take first or a center going to take second. There's some people who say center is just not valuable enough a position to get in the first round. Especially if you're sitting there and top flight corners and top flight offensive tackles are available. So what about getting him in the second round or later? And that's where it becomes tricky because the Steelers have to evaluate just who they feel are those guys who they think can come in and make a difference next year. So before Mike Tomlin even said this, I plan to make this a big part of the show because continues to be a lot of discussions about who the Steelers want to pick, especially in the first 2 rounds this year, and who they want to prioritize. And some people want a new wide receiver. They want to go get Brian Thomas. They want to go get Quinion Mitchell at cornerback. They want to go get Cooper DeJean, or some people want Jackson Powers Johnson at center, or they want J.C. Latham at tackle. And it's an interesting dynamic there of skill players versus line players. So I put out 2 mock drafts, and these are just not ones that I did a whole bunch of work on. I just went with 2 different models, went on Pro Football Focus and just said, okay, let's do a mock draft simulator and let's get these type of players versus these type of players as far as the Steelers early picks. And I put an A and a B, and I said, hey, which one do you guys prefer? And I put that out there on my Twitter at Carter Critiques. And so here's the picks if you're looking at them on YouTube. I'll explain them for our listeners who can't see this. But on the draft A that I put together, the first, and then these were without any trades, just straight down the board. If the Steelers were just stuck with every pick they had. In draft A, they drafted within the first round Quinion Mitchell, the cornerback out of Toledo. Personally, my CB1 in this draft class. And then in the second round, they went and got Roman Wilson, a wide receiver out of Michigan. Really like Roman Wilson. I thought that would be a great fit there. Then they get their offensive lineman in the third round because remember, they now have 2 third-round picks because of the Deontay Johnson trade. And now with the first third-round pick, they got Patrick Paul, the tackle out of Houston. And then with the second third-round pick, we got Bo Limmer from Arkansas, who graded very highly in the combine as far as his relative athletic score, but doesn't have the greatest tape at times, which is why he's in the third round. And then finishing out the draft, got defensive lineman Leonard Taylor of Miami, and then safety James Williams in the 6th round. Also of Miami, and then finishing out with the 6th round pick, MJ Devonshire, the Pitt cornerback from Aliquippa. So that was draft A. But draft B, I switched it around. Instead of getting a corner and receiver first, I got those later. In draft B, I got Amarius Mims in the first round at tackle. Then I got Zach Frazier. He's not always there in the second round when the Steelers get to 51 in a lot of simulators, but in this one he was, so I took him there. Then in the third round, went wide receiver, went with Brendan Rice out of USC. Jeremiah Trotter at the other third round pick, still addressing linebackers. They can at least have 4 capable linebackers next season, off-ball linebackers, that is. And then with the fourth round, went Tyke Smith, the safety out of Georgia, particularly because it's less about the safety and more about his work at being a potential slot corner. I think he could be a guy that could slide in there and really work at that position. And then finishing out the draft with the 6th round picks, Tarheeb Still, cornerback out of Maryland, and doubling up at center with Hunter Norzad out of Penn State in the 6th round, a person that Alan Saunders has said on the show that he likes a lot in this draft class. So there you have it. 2 draft classes, A and B, that I went with these mock drafts. But the idea was one was getting the priority of putting the priority of the skill positions, cornerback and receiver. The other was putting the priority in the offensive line. And overwhelmingly, you all responded when I asked you all about this, that draft B with all the picks that were associated with the offensive line to start, Mims and Frazier, and then getting the rest after that. That was the draft that a lot of Steelers fans would prefer. And to me, it sounds like that would also be the draft that the Steelers themselves prefer. And it might also mean that they're going to be trying to get that tackle early and then also try to move up to get a decent spot to make sure they get one of those centers that they feel are capable of plugging and playing on day one when they get in with the Steelers. Because he did say, they believe in Nick Herbig, but as we've said, if they believe in Nick Herbig, why the heck didn't he get any snaps when Mason Cole couldn't get a snap off the ground at some points this past season? So I just think the Steelers, they're going to be in a position where maybe they still sign a free agent center somewhere and they bring him in, but they're going to try and get one of these early centers here. It just makes too much sense for me when I'm looking at how the Steelers are working here, and I'm not sure it's going to be in the first round. I think that they're going to look at this and still say, hey, you can get it. The top flight tackles and top flight corners, they can be game changers if you get those right. But if you don't get your center in the first round, which again I don't think that they might try to do, they are going to need to make sure they get them in the second, because after the second it gets tumultuous, it gets unsure of things, and that's where I think things could get tricky for the Steelers if they don't land their guy early. So I think it shows that the Steelers do have a plan to continue to work on the offensive line. But let's also acknowledge, like, the Steelers have done a ton this offseason. Like, it's not like it's not been for a lack of work. They had to figure out what they were doing at quarterback. They brought in Russell Wilson to compete with Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett didn't want to compete with Russell Wilson. So then you go and get Justin Fields, who will compete with Russell Wilson. And you also get one of the top linebackers on the board in this draft class, so that you can make sure that you have an every down linebacker ready to go in Patrick Queen. And then you also, swap, bringing in a veteran cornerback for getting away Deontay Johnson. I still don't think that was the best trade value. That might have been one of the few things I disagree with Omar Khan about, but they've made all these moves, they've done all these things, and they still have more moves to make, including the NFL draft. So I don't think that the Steelers have necessarily sat on their hands, but they haven't addressed the thing that Mike Tomlin says is going to be a big crux of the offense when he's talking about, controlling the game through their bigs and building from there. They need to be better with their bigs. Now, I will say this too. Even though Dan Moore Jr. and Mason Cole were part of the offensive line last year, when you go back to the last 10 games the Steelers played and averaged out across the NFL, they had the second most rushing yards in the NFL during that span once Broderick Jones became a consistent starter. Broderick Jones will be a guy also that my comment said it's not a guarantee that he plays left tackle next year. And I think part of that's because they might draft a tackle early. And if that tackle's a better left tackle than Broderick Jones, why make that tackle change when Broderick Jones has already shown he's a capable right tackle? Which is something I've been saying for a while. Don't get too caught up with that kind of stuff. Just expect either, if they get 2 tackles, they're going to see who the better one is at different positions in training camp. But the bottom line to me here is they already have good pieces on the offensive line. James Daniels, Isaac Seumalo, Broderick Jones, they're 3 guys that I think are very important to what they're trying to do. But they need another tackle, and they need a center. And if they can get a center and maybe live with Dan Moore Jr. until another tackle comes along, that's possible. But they got to get center for sure. And if they can get tackle and center, I think that's the best move that this offensive line can get to becoming one of the better units in the NFL. And that can get along the Steelers to get back to that point where I'm talking about them not necessarily top 10 offense in the NFL, but hover around top 15, hover around that 16th spot, get in the middle of the pack, and not at the bottom of the league where you're averaging less than 18 points a game. They do that with this current defense as long as TJ Watt's healthy and the defense is healthy in general, and they don't go through having practice squad safety and linebacker guys starting for the second half of the season. That could be the key to making this Steelers team a serious competitor again. But how do they do that? They got to get it done in the draft too, and we're going to get to Mock Draft Monday where you all submitted lots of mock drafts for me to review yet again. We'll go over who won this week right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast right after this. Stay tuned. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show to switch to Mock Draft Monday. Now, every week, we always put out the Mock Draft Monday calls on the Locked On Steelers Facebook group and on my Twitter account, and we receive tons of entries, and so I'm reviewing everything. And this week, I said, hey, you know what? Omar Khan's shown he don't got no rules. He just gets the job done. He trades can because I said, come up with the craziest thing that you could think of. Or not, I didn't even say that. I said, you have no restrictions. Go and get who you want to get. Make it happen. And I thought there were going to be a lot of crazy drafts like, oh, we just traded up to get Caleb Williams or something like that. But no, a lot of y'all guys stayed reasonable, made sensible picks. And for that, I applaud you because there's been sometimes I've done these mock draft Mondays and it has just been the most ludicrous draft picks that I could even imagine. So congratulations to y'all. Y'all making a lot of sense. But we got to congratulate this week's winner, and that is Jake Staffieri, who submitted a very interesting group of picks here because he addressed several key positions, but not in the ways that we just talked about. First, leading off with Talisa Fuaga, the offensive tackle out of Oregon State. Talisa Fuaga is one of my favorite offensive tackles in this draft class. If he falls to 20, it is a sprint to the podium type of moment. Make it happen. You get it done there. And so that is a guy who I think you plug him at right tackle, move Broderick Jones to left, and then you got two bruisers who are athletic and crush people at your tackle positions. Two key spots that can really help things out there. So good job, Jake, getting that position. Then it appears that Jake traded back a little bit in the second round, because he wound up with the 56th overall pick, and it turned, and I'm not entirely sure about all the trade conditions here from Jake's picks, but he got Braden Fisk, and Braden Fisk is I really like Braden Fisk on the defensive line, and he with Keanu Benton, that is the future right there. In interior defensive line, that's a 1-2 punch that people will be afraid of, and that could make the Steelers real nasty up front. It could also talk about something we talked about last week, and that was fixing the run defense and adding to the defensive line. Because now if you have those two guys, there's less pressure to have to keep Cam Hayward out there for so long and to have to roll with Larry Ogunjobi all the time and to work it back in better. Then you got two young guys that are a big part of your future, and both of them really tough at the line of scrimmage, really athletic guys that I think will be good fits for what the Steelers want to do. So Braden Fisk, a good pick there. And then now he has three third round picks because of the trade back in the second round, which I think is a good situation there. And one of those picks, the first of those picks, he used on Mike Sandrisdale, a corner from Michigan who I really like, has really good tape. He projects more as a slot corner, which is a current need on this team. And even though slot corner isn't necessarily the premier position in the third round, I think that's good value to get from Mike Sandrisdale. I think he could be a game changer. He's like a Mike Hilton, but better in coverage, in my opinion. If you're looking at at the type of player that he can be, I think he has higher ceilings as far as dropping back and covering guys downfield, but he's also physical. He knows when to blitz. He knows how to play, contribute in other ways. So I like that situation. Then with the next pick, he goes Brendan Rice out of USC, the wide receiver, Jerry Rice's son, I believe. And you look at him and how Brendan and how that was a pick that I put in one of the mock drafts I have there. I don't think Brendan Rice is a game changer, but I think he'd be a solid number 2 that you could work with and kind of still have George Pickens lead the way with him kind of filling in, and then maybe you still get a Tyler Boyd type, and then you have those three, Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson, and that's your receiving core, and I think that can work. But then with his third round pick, he got a guy that I think really fits with the Steelers, and that's Junior Colson, another Michigan player, this one, a linebacker. Now, we've talked about Junior Colson a lot in this draft class because Junior Colson is physical, he stuffs the run, he's athletic enough, he's not great against the pass, but he can help against the pass. To me, he could be your eventual Landon Roberts replacement because Landon Roberts is good, and you have him right now, but it's not definite that you're going to have a Landon Roberts for too long. So if you get a Junior Colson and pair him with Patrick Queen can be your every down guy. Junior Colson can be your traditional buck linebacker. We talked about that with Jim Wexell last week on the Locked On Steelers podcast, because the traditional roles of 3-4 linebackers, off-ball guys that play the middle linebacker positions, there's Buck and there's Mac. And Mac is more of the guy that's on every play. He can cover the pass. He can flow everywhere. The communication flows to him. Buck is more of the run-stuffing, physical but slower guy that you send in. You take out the fullback. You go get the running back, those type of situations. So Junior Colson could be the eventual Buck linebacker to Patrick Queen being a Mac linebacker. And I think that fits very well there. And then with the 4th round, he gets another play that I kind of like, Javon Baker out of Central Florida. I really like Javon Baker as an early day 3 pick. If the Steelers landed him there, I think he has the traits to be a good wide receiver in the NFL. And so again, also with this draft pick now, you're talking about 2 young wide receivers. So maybe you don't even need a Tyler Boyd in this situation, because you've got 2 young wide receivers who will be going after for the number 2 spot. The person who doesn't get it probably gets the number 3 spot or competes with Calvin Austin for the number 3 spot. And then you still have that guy as your 4, and then Van Jefferson as your 5. So that's why I went with this draft class. I thought that this was, as far as the mock draft Monday winner, good jobs here from Jake. Then finishing out the draft with 6 round picks, Kingsley Aguikan, a center who isn't going to be competing for center, and this is the one flaw I have in this draft, means that the Steelers are going to need to address center elsewhere. And then he finishes out with another 6th round pick, Marshawn Nealand, an edge rusher out of Western Michigan. You could add an edge rusher and just see what they contribute down the line. But why I picked this draft was the trenches help that it gives, and then the skill help that it gives where it gives it, because it got offensive tackle, primary position in the 1st round. Braden Fisk, who I think is one of my favorite defensive line prospects in this draft class, in the 2nd round. Then you get a corner and 2 wide receivers in reasonable spots in the middle parts of the draft. That, to me, fits a lot of what the Steelers could do and makes a lot of sense to do with the current roster that they have. And you also get your 4th linebacker, because remember, you have Patrick Queen, you still have a Landon Roberts, Cole Holcomb. You got to see if he comes back from injury. But if he doesn't, you have Junior Colson waiting in the wings, and he's your first guy off the bench. And that makes it so you don't have to rely on like Mark Robinson to be your 4th guy who comes in if someone gets hurt or whatever. So there you have it. Your mock draft Monday winner is Jake Staffieri. Congratulations again, Jake. Everyone, thanks again for all your submissions. There's a ton to consider, and there was a lot of good ones too. Like there's a lot of different ones I've gone back and forth about the Steelers options, and we'll continue to do that until the draft day itself. Thanks again for everyone contributing to Mock Draft Monday. Thanks again to everyone tuning in to the Locked On Steelers podcast. You want to give me a birthday gift? Go on Apple Podcasts right now. Rate us 5 stars. Leave a positive comment. When you do both at the same time, it really helps out the show. Thanks so much. We'll give you a shout out as well for those who do that. Thanks again for everyone for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. Back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.